There's a name for the specific experience of knowing you need an emergency fund, sitting down to find the money for it, and genuinely not finding it. It's not irresponsibility. It's not a math problem you failed. It's called building from zero, and there is a way to do it that almost no conventional financial advice has ever clearly explained. Not because the information doesn't exist, because the advice was never actually written for a budget where every dollar is already spoken for. This video is. Here's what's going to be different by the end of it. Not a vague sense that it's possible, but a specific first move. Small enough to start today, real enough to change something before the next paycheck arrives. The standard emergency fund advice goes like this. Save 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Keep it in a high-yield savings account. Don't touch it unless it's a real emergency. That advice is not wrong. For someone with surplus at the end of every month, it's actually quite good. The problem is that it was designed around a specific assumption that the person receiving it has something left over after the bills are paid. Not a lot left over, just something. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck on a salary that looks fine from the outside, something left over is precisely what you do not have. Research on how financial advice is created and distributed consistently shows that it clusters around median to upper income earners, the people statistically most likely to act on it and to have the margin to do so, which means a large portion of the people who most need a safety net have been handed instructions written for someone else's financial life. Here's what Save 3 to 6 months is actually measuring. It's measuring surplus discipline, the ability to see money at the end of a month and move it somewhere before it disappears. If your month ends at zero, not from carelessness, but from math, surplus discipline is not a skill you can apply, because there is no surplus to discipline. Anyone who's been carrying this knows the specific frustration of that, of reading the advice, understanding it completely, and having nowhere to put it. That is not a failure of understanding. That is advice to situation mismatch, and it has nothing to do with your character. The question this video is actually going to answer is a different one entirely. Not how do I save 3 to 6 months of expenses? What is the smallest amount of money that interrupts the feeling of being one bad month from disaster? And how do I get there from zero? Those are different questions. And the second one has an answer. So let's talk about what a buffer actually does, because the number on the page isn't the point. Here's something the 3 to 6 months framing never explains. What an emergency fund is actually doing that makes it worth having. The obvious answer is, it pays for emergencies. That's true. But it's not the most important thing it does. The more important thing, the thing that changes before you ever have to spend a dollar of it, is what it does to your nervous system. Behavioral finance research has a name for what happens when someone consistently operates at or near zero. Scarcity mindset. And the findings on it are not comfortable. When a brain is managing ongoing financial fragility, not a crisis, just the chronic state of no margin, it consumes a measurable portion of cognitive bandwidth, just maintaining awareness of the threat. The math is always running in the background. The check and recheck cycle never fully stops. And decisions made under that cognitive load are statistically worse than decisions made from a position of even modest stability. Here's what's actually happening. It's not that financial anxiety makes you bad at managing money. It's that operating at zero makes it structurally harder to manage money well. And then the outcomes of those harder decisions get read as evidence of personal failure. There's also what researchers sometimes call the poverty premium, the specific way that having no buffer makes everything cost more. The overdraft fee that wouldn't exist if there were $50 in the account. The car repair that becomes a loan because there was nothing to absorb it. The grocery run on a credit card because the timing was wrong. Zero is not neutral. Zero is expensive, which brings us to what even a small buffer actually changes. Not $1,000. Not 3 months. A buffer. $200. Sometimes less. The research on this is specific. The threshold at which people report a measurable reduction in financial anxiety is not 3 months of expenses. It is the experience of having something between them and zero. Something that means the next small, unexpected cost doesn't immediately become a crisis. Something they can see when they open the banking app. The emergency fund isn't primarily a financial tool. It's a nervous system tool. And that reframe matters because it changes the target. The target isn't 3 months. The target is something instead of nothing. That is a different problem. And it is a solvable one. Now here's the part where most advice stops working. But this is where we actually begin. So here is what the conventional advice skips. The part that actually applies when every dollar is already spoken for. The method isn't find extra money and save it. The method is intercept money that is already moving through your hands before it disappears, in an amount small enough that it doesn't destabilize anything else. This is called automating a micro-transfer, and the version that works for a paycheck-to-paycheck budget looks nothing like the version in standard financial advice. Here's the specific architecture. Step 1. Open a separate savings account, not at the same bank as your checking account. Separation matters. When the emergency fund lives inside the same app as the account you spend from, it doesn't feel like a buffer. It feels like spending money you're temporarily not spending. A different institution creates a small structural friction that protects the buffer from the ordinary flow of the month. It doesn't have to be complicated. Many online banks open in under 5 minutes with no minimum balance and no fees. Step 2. Set up an automatic transfer on the day after your paycheck lands for the smallest amount that feels genuinely non-threatening. Not the amount you think you should be saving. The amount that, if it moved this week, you would not feel it in any of your other obligations. For some people, that's $25. For some, it's $10. For some, right now, it's $5. All of those are correct answers. Here's what's actually happening when you do this. You are not building savings through discipline. You are installing a floor, and the floor starts working from the moment it exists, not from the moment it reaches a target number. The day you see $47 in that account instead of $0, something shifts that has nothing to do with $47. It shifts because the 0 is gone. Because there is now a number between you and the next unexpected cost. Because when the phone notification comes from your bank, it is not confirmation of something you've been dreading. It is a number that is yours. Anyone who's been carrying the 0 knows that this is not a small thing. That is the nervous system responding to a structural change, not to a dollar amount. The method does not require finding money you don't have. It requires moving a very small amount of money from one place to another before the rest of the month absorbs it. That is a different ask. And it is one you can make this week. For anyone who wants the daily structure that turns this first move into a 30-day build, there's a program in the description called the Emergency Fund Challenge. It's 30 days of microtasks, each one small enough to do in under 10 minutes, with printable trackers that make the progress visible instead of abstract. It was built specifically for budgets with no margin, and it starts exactly where this video does, at 0. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. Now let's address the 3 questions I know are already forming, because they come up every time someone hears this approach. 3 objections come up every time this approach gets explained. All 3 are worth answering directly. The first, I also have debt. Shouldn't I be paying that down instead? Here's what's actually happening when someone with debt skips the buffer entirely. Every unexpected expense goes back onto the debt. The net movement is 0 or negative. A small buffer, even $50 or $100, interrupts that cycle. It means the next unexpected cost doesn't immediately undo whatever progress was made. Debt repayment and a starter buffer are not competing priorities. The buffer is what makes the debt repayment stick. The second, I genuinely don't have even $25. Then the starting number is smaller. This is not a motivational statement. It's a mechanical one. If $5 moves to a separate account this week, $5 exists in a separate account this week. That is the beginning of something that did not exist before. The research on habit formation around saving consistently shows that the behavior of saving, the act of moving money intentionally, builds the neural pathway that makes the next move easier, regardless of the amount. The number you start with is not the point. The act of starting is the point. The third, what if something comes up and I have to use it? Then use it. This is the objection that the word emergency in emergency fund creates. It implies that touching it is failure. It isn't. An emergency fund that gets used for an emergency has done exactly what it was built to do. The move after using it is to restart the automatic transfer, not to feel shame about the interruption, not to interpret the use as evidence that this doesn't work. The buffer was there. It absorbed the shock. Now it rebuilds. That cycle, building, using, rebuilding, is not a sign of a broken system. It is the system working. Here's the one step for this week. Open a separate savings account. Takes under 10 minutes. Set a recurring transfer for the smallest amount that will not destabilize anything else in your budget. Let it move on its own. Not a plan. Not a commitment to a number you'll hit in 6 months. One transfer. One account. This week. That is the whole ask. If you want the 30-day structure that builds from that first transfer day by day in amounts designed for real budget constraints, the Emergency Fund Challenge is linked in the description and the pinned comment. It starts where you are. That's the point of it. What's the specific thing that's made starting an emergency fund feel impossible before? And does the buffer framing change that at all? This is genuinely hard. The cost of living right now is not abstract. The gap between a salary that looks okay from the outside and a budget that ends at zero every month is not a gap that's supposed to close itself. Most financial advice does not say that plainly. And the absence of that plainness is part of why so many people carry the private conclusion that they're the problem. They're not. Here's what's true instead. The paycheck to zero cycle is not a discipline failure. It's a structural condition, one that conventional savings advice was not built to address. The buffer installation method is not a consolation prize for people who can't do the real thing. It is the real thing, adapted for real constraints. And the first number you put in that account, whatever it is not a small beginning of a large goal. It is the moment the zero becomes something else. That moment matters, not because $47 is financial security, because $47 means the next notification from your bank doesn't arrive with that specific dread in your chest before you've even opened it. Because there is now something between you and whatever comes next. Because a brain that has been running a background threat assessment every day for years gets a small, genuine signal that the threat has changed. That signal compounds. You are not going to be where you are in a year if you take one real step in the next 7 days. That step is open the account, set the transfer, let it move. Not a system, not a promise, one step. The person who watched this far, who wanted to believe it was possible, even while bracing for another reason it wasn't, that person is already doing something different from what they were doing before they pressed play. That's not nothing. That's the part that changes first.